Om Tadviti Pranipatena Pariprasthena Sevaya Upadekshanti Te Jnana Jnaninas Tattvadarshana Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Sincere students approach illumined gurus with humility, prostration, and service. And then those wise ones initiate them into the highest Brahman. Om, peace, peace, peace. May peace be unto us. May peace be unto all. Om, Hari Om, Hari Om, Hari Om, Tat Sat. Namaste in India. Aloha from Hawaii. And Om Namo Narayanaya. Salutations to the Lord existing in all beings. As we all gather here from various points of the world to engage in what's known as Satsang. Satsangatve nisangatvam nisangatve nirmohatvam nirmohatve nischalitatvam nischalitatvam Jivanmukti, as my teacher used to say. Must become a Jivanmukta after you enter into communion with holy beings and get steadiness of mind, nischalitatvam, nirmohatvam, freedom from delusion. And that all leads you to this state, which my teacher, Swami Sheshanandaji Maharaj, peace and blessings be upon him always, was always reiterating to us that we've come here for one purpose, and that's to attain Jivanmukti, to become Jivanmuktas. And he reminded us about that every time he had us in front of him, which was probably not enough for most people. They needed that injection of Brahmagyan that he was going to give you each time you sat with him. And he stood before you delivering his teachings on Vedanta from the podium. And then in satsang himself at night, and sometimes in classes on the Katha Upanishad, and then in the shrine room too, when we meditated and did arati and pujas with him. And then on holy days, when Durga Puja, Kali Puja, and various wonderful events that happened in Portland there, and we all attended upon him at the ashram. So those times were blessed, and we remember them fondly, and they're very auspicious to those of us who knew him and received teachings from him. But as I say, could have been a lot more in his company. And the more we are in holy company, even if it's via mechanisms and mediums, like we're seeing each other through right now, screens and computer things, then it's going to have to do for the most part. Vedanta means Veda Anta, and Anta means the end of the Vedas. And at the end of the Vedas, you will find the Upanishads. 108 of them right now, as it stands in this phase of time, but there are probably many, many more that have disappeared from humanity's gaze. But they're just falling back to be stored in the minds of the rishis who come from time to time and bring them forward again, put them into writing. First of all, they may just have you memorize them, as you know, so that they're inscripted upon your internal organ, your subtle body, your mind, hopefully written there in letters of molten gold, as the Muslims say about the Quran. And then you can just meditate on them without the clumsiness of words and without the obstruction of written words. And you can get straight to the point and meditate. Good to hear about Brahman, as we say, and better to take teachings on Brahman. And then third, better than that is to meditate directly upon Brahman, until fourth, that meditation on Brahman reveals to you your own self, which is Brahman. Aham Brahmasmi, as they say in our tradition. So we meet then this Saturday, and I hope you've all come armed to the teeth, as the expression is, with some questions. I meant to remind everyone this time to probably prepare for satsang. Don't just casually appear and wait for things to happen, although that can be beneficial. But actually think it ahead and come forth with some questions. We call that Atma Vichara in our tradition. That is Vichara, inquiry about the Atman. And it's done very seldomly in the world. Many people, when they walk up to you and say, "How are you?" It'd be nice if they met, "How is your Atman?" or "How are you and your Atman doing together?" But they're usually speaking about your ego and its pleasures and pains, your life and its circumstances, which is called Maya, changing Maya. But it'd be nice if maybe we got more direct and say, "How's your Atman today?" There's a story my teacher used to tell about a bunch of monks meeting on a pathway, pilgrimage pathway in the mountains. So they're walking along and they bump into each other. You see, "Oh, hi, how are you doing? Namaste." And so one said to the old monk, and this is a more recent story that happened actually in the lives of some of the direct disciples of our tradition. "Well, how is your sight? How is your sight?" Which means, of course, how's your insight? And the old monk said, "Well, pretty good. I can still read the phone book at my age." So even eventually people lose track of the fact that the most important thing is this Atman. And that's what we're looking at in the form of the body and mind, and that is thinking about in terms of the mind, and even speaking and seeing. If the mind is awakened to the Atman, then everything becomes that Atman. And it's a perspective that we would like to be able to become more adept at availing ourselves of. Only Atman abides, or we are Atman all abiding. So when we meet in holy company, sadhu satsanga it's called, that's the opportunity to ask how your sight is. How's your insight doing this past week, or since I've seen you last? And get straight to the chase, because otherwise, the routine. Basically, how are you doing? And it's you get a whole list of trials and troubles read to you, or talk to you about. People are just constantly speaking about their lives in Maya. Because it's very rare then to be able to speak about the non-dual Brahman as far as that's possible, and to maybe, if not, come down a step or come out a stage or two to the Jnanam, the Atma Jnanam that can be spoken of, and then maybe a little further out to the general teachings of the Dharma, which guide us through this difficult life in Maya. And if we have to, then if we do talk about suffering and so forth, and what's troubling us, what's plaguing us, then we do it under the auspice of speaking about it consciously, like we know there's such a thing as Maya. Because a lot of people who don't know that word, or don't know that there's covering power over their true nature happening everywhere around them all times. And we'll talk about that at the God blog session soon, because there was a real good God blog on that particular topic. That the covering power is all around them. Then they can't talk about the Maya. They're just in it, and they don't know they're speaking about it when it comes up. But if you say the word suffering, and you know that suffering is to be transcended, then you've automatically got an advantage over those problems of life, because your mental attitude changes. Your manasana, I like to call it, the posture of your mind changes. And so you're already distancing yourself from these problems that otherwise plague people who don't have anywhere to go to get distance from them. So it's a very beautiful facet, even though it might be an early stage of witness consciousness. Nevertheless, it's very beneficial to avail yourself of. So we get an opportunity to do that more intensely when we're together and sharing holy company, speaking about our Atman in knowledge of it and in consciousness about it. Even if it hasn't been fully uncovered yet, nonetheless, those stages are very important. So that's my opening on the import of satsang. And maybe you can enter in right away soon with some questions that have been bubbling up in the mind and about your teachings and studies, your readings, your contemplations. And Chris, yes, you start us rolling, please. Namaste.
Namaste, Babaji. I was wondering if you could speak on some of the subtle differences between Ishvara and Ishtadevi, particularly regarding Sri Ramakrishna, Sri Sharada Devi, and Kali or Mahamaya or Mahashakti. Is it kind of in Jesus speak, the if the Antaryami, the ruler, immortal seated in the heart, then that's Sri Ramakrishna or Sri Sharada Devi, as opposed to Kali or Mahamaya or Mahashakti. So I guess that's the train of my question.
Yeah, and the whole middle of your question disappeared to me.
Okay.
Went into computer speak, actually, because I don't know if it's the Wi-Fi on your side or if it's the Wi-Fi on your side, but or if anyone else heard the full question, but I certainly got the gist of it. And so yeah, that's some confusion that can arise in people when you hear words, and it arises around your own guru, what place he or she takes in that, and meditating on your heart, on the Ishtam or the Ishtadevata or Ishtadevi, and Ishvara itself, the chosen ideal or the inner ruler immortal seated in the heart, would move more towards the Atman. So you do have one Brahman in it all, but it appears in different phases, different levels of vibration. And of course, the whole problem, if it could be called such, would be when the soul leaves the realm of indivisibility, like oneness, they call it, or homogeneity, and enters into two-ness or varieties. Then even spiritual teachings, as I was just actually talking about, Atmagyan and Dharma and Maya and so forth, they also fall into categories, sections, which are higher or lower or more inward or more external. Gross and subtle would be the words to use. So in terms of our Ishtadevi, that would be Sri Ramakrishna's mother Kali, that would be his Ishtadevi, that would be his chosen ideal. And whereas a lot of people would love to take Kali as their Ishtadevi, and maybe they do in a certain sense, the tradition is always saying, don't look directly at the sun when, you got to put sunglasses on or look at the moon first to get your eyes adjusted. So that means looking at your own Ishtadevi or Ishtadevata, which would be either Sri Ramakrishna or Holy Mother, your gurus, your Parama Guru. And so these are held in the heart and mind. When you've got, in our case, when you've got such truly great souls, and more than one of them in terms of SRV, is how our founder came out and tried to explain that to us, is you've got Sharda, Ramakrishna, and Vivekananda all vying for a place in your heart and a place in your mind's eye, your attentions. So that's also another thing that sometimes causes people to question or doubt. So basically, Holy Mother had put that more to rest when she said, they asked her, should we meditate on you or should we meditate on the master? And she said, meditating on either of us, we're the same thing, exactly the same being. So you can meditate on either one of us. But the guru might give you a mantra that's particular to one of them because you have more affection towards one of them. So it's going to be an easier way to focus your attentions and your concentration if you use that mantra with that particular deity. Now, in America, we have it, we're at a disadvantage by not knowing about deities and mantras and so forth very much. But we're also at an advantage in that we're not confused by how did Krishnamurti say it? 450,000 gods and goddesses. So, and amongst all of those many gods and goddesses, which in India, of course, are seen as aspects of the divine. That's why there's so many arms, because they're all powers of the one deity and different aspects of the one deity. But when in India, they've even condensed it down to basically 4 or 5 deities and mantras that you can select from. And so you'll be worshiping Shiva or Divine Mother or Vishnu, Krishna. Ganapati is another that has millions of followers. So you'll be concentrating on each one of these with that mantra. And this is a nice mudra right there. I like to say, the 5 different darshanas, they're like this when you start out and you choose one, and then it comes like this. These 4 get behind this one, and you select one, and these 4 don't go away, but they get behind this one that you select. So it's simultaneously a way of saying that I love all the gods and goddesses, and I just had to pick one for my practice. But when I picked that one, the others didn't abandon me. They just merged into the one I picked. So that's always the way of looking at the integration of deities. And unfortunately, probably you shouldn't think that way about your mantras, because if you do that, you definitely do want to hone that particular mantra that pertains to the deity that you're calling on. It's all very straightforward, really, and simple to think that if I were to call someone from this room and there are 5 people in the next room, and I would call someone, that one would come in and hopefully the other 4 wouldn't, to cause more confusion. So you're calling on that one deity, but the direction is not outward to a room in your house, it's inward to the shrine in your heart. So when you focus like that, that's called concentration, and it leads to meditation, and that meditation will lead to oneness, or i.e. samadhi. Those are the upper 3 limbs of yoga. So if you're practicing that all the time, you're doing it with a one-pointed mind on your Ishtadevi. These grand deities that like Kali and Vishnu and so forth, I think you mentioned Christianity and Christ speak, getting through the Father to the Son, I think I heard. And that's a very good and true principle, that when you chose that one, just in this case, Jesus, that would lead you into that fullness of formlessness, or Almighty Father. Although there's very little taught or said about it in Christianity. But in India, there's a lot taught and said about getting into Brahman through the Ishtam. And you have words for it, teachings for it, mantras for it, meditations for it, instructions. And you have various pathways, not just one, in which you can get into that union with that one formless reality, which, as I said, and I started out the satsang today, is that Jivanmukti that you're looking for. Yes, you do need help here from what's saying. You need to have friends in high places, you see. So if you want to try and extract yourself from Maya, attachment to the 5 elements, the body, which have you thought to be yourself for lifetimes, what to speak of, 50, 60, 70 years in this lifetime alone. Tibetans teach that you're going to have to let go of the body and let go of the 5 elements: earth, air, fire, water, and ether. Remember the seminar 2 weeks ago when I taught that in the burning pillar meditation, when we were letting go of the various elements and the passions that are at certain centers. That's a pretty common teaching in Indian meditation. It's sort of like if you didn't do that, you'd be trying to get out of the harbor before you while still having the ropes tied to the dock. You see, captain's saying, "Okay, let's go. There's a good wind. The sails are full and everything, but you haven't cast off the ropes from the dock yet, so you're still being held there." So that's kind of an analogy of a person who would try and go forward like that to these higher stages without first settling these questions or these issues around practice. And then you could go full steam with the wind out of the harbor. So there are songs written about that and so forth. They're very beautiful. So yes, the higher deities are sort of like the sun, and you can't look straight at the sun. So the moon takes the sun's light and makes it very beautiful to look at. Actually, it's not painful. So your Sri Sharda and your Sri Ramakrishna, your Swami Vivekananda would be more like moons in the light of something like Mahakali, the great sun, the great light. I think you could probably put that into the context of the ocean of light. Brahman also can be very overwhelming when a person catches the first glimpse of it, and therefore one could become disoriented. Disorientation is one of the poisons that's in the third eye chakra. It's very hard to keep yourself balanced. So that focus on one particular form that you're familiar with is very important. That's actually one of the 7 ways in which to attain illumination in yoga by the father of yoga. Meditate on the sorrowless ocean of light. But that's one of the more advanced ones. But early on, you meditate upon anything that's beneficial and helpful and pleasant to you. You take up an image that you like, that's going to help you concentrate. And so that could be a picture or an icon. They call that a pratika or a pratima. And then you focus on that and pour all of your attention, all of your love into that particular aspect of Brahman. And then that will deepen your meditation so that pretty soon you will be able to graduate inward by degrees and get used to this light of consciousness. Like mules going up to the top of the mountain, they have to stop at 10,000 feet, get acclimatized, and then go another 1,000 feet, get acclimatized. Just like that, the meditator has to acclimatize to these rarefied atmospheres of meditation where you can sit longer and longer periods of time in that light, like Buddha did under the Bo tree for 49 days. So it's a long time to sit and to become acclimatized. Or 12 days and 12 nights in the wilderness. Basically, there's long periods of time in which you will want to subject yourself to cast off those moorings that your mind has to the harbor of Maya, the marketplace of mundane human convention. Ram Prasad says, I have to give that up, and all the bazaar of pleasures and various things that are there. You people of modern times, Milarepa sings, I just put this in a God blog too. You people of modern times, you attend and live in towns that are full of karmas. That's why you should keep a deep connection to the Dharma. And those are the first two lines of his song. Milarepa used to sing songs at you. He wouldn't talk to you. If you came upon him on a mountain path, he'd look at you and sing a song at you. If you didn't like his song, it meant that you should go change yourself, because he was just singing what he saw. So at one time he met someone and said, you people living in towns that are infested by impure karmas, you need to keep a connection to the Dharma. So this is really the only recourse for people to be able to do that. I was driving yesterday and took a wrong turn, got into this subdivision. It was a new bunch of houses that nobody had moved into yet. It was just stretching on up there, up the sides of the volcano, on this lava land that you couldn't grow anything on. They're just building houses up there. And people were soon to move in there and make a neighborhood of that. The first thing they plumped down, of course, was a church. And so that's not what we're talking about here when we talk about taking refuge to the Dharma, in the Dharma, and going to see an illumined soul. My teacher used to say, the guru I see is not popular here because the church has taken its place. So he didn't like the idea that people didn't have a single illumined soul to go to talk to share the teachings with, but they had to gather in some congregation who probably, the congregation without a leader, without a real leader, who wasn't illumined yet, who was married just like they were, maybe, or who still drank beer at dinner and who still did various things in Maya. And then they want to walk into that church and call it sacred or something. See? So the subdivision just plunked a church down there. And the next thing that was being set up and built was a bank. So I was driving by all of this. Isn't this just typical of this world? False religion and attachment to wealth is the first thing they'll provide for when they set up a neighborhood. They build houses for people to live 80 years in that kind of a lifestyle. But the first thing you should have is basically a sacred place in your own home even. You should have a sacred shrine set up there where you can meditate on the Ishta and come to know that there's a great light that's enveloping all and pervading and transcending everything here. Objects that cry out to you, I'm not real, I'm not real. I'm covering something else. Everything is stamped with a seal that says, I'm covering something. I'm covering the true reality. Don't believe in me. That's what the yogi sees when they see objects. It's stamped with a seal. Like when that same mind gets more illumined, then that stamped with the seal of I am Brahman, I am Brahman. So what happened between the stamp that said I am not real and the stamp that told them I am Brahman? So they saw through the veiling power and they saw that one divine reality existing, not as an object, but behind all objects, supporting all objects. And then there was a transformation that took place in the mind at that time. And so much so that then pretty soon it'd be hard to go out of your house without seeing everything as Brahman. And then you've got a different kind of problem. Like Sri Ramakrishna falling over. It's see something that inspired him, which was about everything at that time. So very important to have these chosen ideals. Everyone needs an ideal here. What was it? Swamiji said, I see that if a man with an ideal makes 1,000 mistakes, that a man without an ideal makes 100,000 mistakes. So if you have that ideal to guide you, it's like Holy Mother talking about a game that's sort of like checkers. See? So Sri Ramakrishna asked her one time, "Do you know that game?" And she said, "No, what's that about?" He said, "Well, it's kind of like checkers, you see. So if you move your place, you move your checker up close to the end of the board, finish line, as it were, then you get crowned, right? So in the game of checkers, then you take another checker, you put it on top of the first checker, and then you're more powerful, you're safe, and then you can move around and take other checkers and so forth." So, and she said, "Well, what's the meaning of that?" She said that if you have your chosen ideals, Sri Ramakrishna said, is that you're crowned, then you go everywhere with that ideal, and that ideal is your life. This world isn't your life anymore. Your family, your kids are not your life anymore. You only have one life, and that's in God. And then everything in life begins to improve because of that. And people are all sensitive and sentimental and emotional and everything about things like this, but it's just very simple. If you just have an ideal and you carry it everywhere with you in your heart, because it's there anywhere. It's there anyway, see. Then it just, everything becomes Brahman-like. Everything gets reflected through that. And shows up signs of being that. The covering power gets stripped off of other things because it's been stripped off of you. Your eye has been made single. So that's the difference between a person with an ideal and a person without an ideal. And there's a difference between a person who just professes a religion and a person who actually practices a religion. So these are all stages on the way towards realization of the self within.
Thank you.
Perhaps this is called up. Yes, sir, certainly. Thank you. Perhaps this has called up a question too in others. Isha, we were just talking about you when we were talking about Ishtadevis and Ishtams.
Namaste, Namaste Babaji, Namaste everyone. I was just earlier this week listening to the interview you had with the Buddha on the gas pump channel, and it's a lovely interview. And yeah, it's good to rewatch it and revisit the video so you can watch it over again and see if you maybe didn't in the first place. Yeah, take it all in, just do it again and see what comes out. Yeah, I was really interested to hear you talk about your initiation with the Tibetan Rinpoche, Karmapa, or I don't really know his real name, but it's interesting that you were initiated into both green and white Tara traditions. And yeah, I haven't really heard you speak much about it. I would maybe like to ask you if you could to maybe elaborate a few words on these two versions of the divine motherhood which exists within the Tibetan tradition. So if you could please, then I would highly appreciate it.
Yeah, I can certainly venture a few words about it. I probably wouldn't have gone and done that if our founder, Lex Hixon, hadn't have encouraged me to do that, because I'd already found Sri Ramakrishna, and reading the gospel. And I was beginning to make, I had acquaintance with Swami Sheshananda. So that was enough for me. And I was young, I was in my 20s. So, but this opportunity came up and of course, my wife was initiated by Kala Rinpoche, who was another very great Rinpoche, and we went to classes that he gave because he'd come through Hawaii quite often, and a very old man. I don't know if anyone even knew how old he was, but he looked old even when we first saw him. He gave these beautiful teachings, just sit there and people would gather around kind of informally. So then Karmapa came, was kind of more of a formal teacher. Dalai Lama came through too and spoke to the Hawaiian people. That was a beautiful thing. And they really all appreciated him. So Tibetan Buddhism was happening in Hawaii at that time, late 70s, 80s. And when Karmapa came through, then I had a chance to go with Lexi. We went from the island of Oahu, where I was living then, to the island of Maui. And he was there with some of his monks. That's where I met Jamgon Khantrul Rinpoche. And a couple of weeks ago gave you that meditation that he gave me, the burning pillar. And so, yes, that was all very beautiful. And it was coming, around the same time when I was deepening my practice into Ramakrishna tradition, the Ramakrishna order. So, yeah, I was wondering how I would field those too, but basically, it was Divine Mother that made that all possible, because I was already initiated by the last living disciple, one of two at the time, into the mantra Sri Ishtadevi. And so I was holding Mother Mantra already and practicing it. And then I got these, Karmapa gave me the green and white Tara, both Mother Mantras, and wanted me to practice those. Om Tari Tu Tari Turi Swaha, Om Tari Tu Tari Turi Mama, Ayu Punya Ganu Puktin Kudur Swaha. That their mantras are quite long, maybe longer sometimes. And basically, it's just it's a triple gem mantra. It's about life, wisdom, and true happiness. And the deities that are there are aspects of Tara. There are other aspects of Tara besides green and white too. The wrathful ones, red Tara and black Tara and so forth. But the ones that were given that day to us both, Lex and I both received white and green Tara mantra, and those mantras were given to us with very special beads, straight by the Karmapa, which was very great. That's why I really couldn't turn it down. I mean, it's hard to get to see him close up or have private audience with him, but there we were, very close and intimate with him. I even played my cello for him that day because I had that with me. And I think I played some Bach for him. He probably never heard Bach before. I don't know. But anyway, it was a very beautiful period there of just a few days. I mean, peacocks were walking around, many of them on this grounds and crying, into the air, their call, and pluming out their feathers. And then on that backdrop, there were these monks in maroon robes and red, walking. Lots of them had attended Karmapa to Maui. So there was a handful of those there, and the people of Maui who were, are collecting there almost in curiosity more than anything else. But there were some practitioners there. And it was after that, I think that a center was set up there with Lama Tenzin, and we used to go there and sit for meditation in his center and listen to him speak, read straight from the Tibetan scrolls. And so there was a really rich time, and so it was good to have an initiation into it. into the Divine Mother part of it particularly. I mean, I took different empowerments, Chenrezig, Buddhist empowerments for the Buddha himself. I got named Rich in the Wisdom of the Buddha. That was my name. And so it was a connection both to the male and female aspect of in Tibetan Buddhism. So it was something that I look back on, was extremely feel fortunate that I was able to do that alongside of and along with Ramakrishna tradition. So the two never really conflicted in me. And that's what Lex said, that I would be able to do that. And so anyway, that's a few words, a little bit of some more earlier times and a little bit more personal times of how I navigated that ocean, all because she who since birth, who's ever led me on from passive travel to perfection's goal, mother wise in her own sweet and playful ways, she was there doing it all and making sure it happened. And 50 years later now, the proof of the pudding has happened. And that was all predestined in my mind. It's all meant to be. It's just sort of like, if I think that when before a soul who's spiritually initiated in any lifetime is born, that they put things in their lives for themselves. Well, I have to go to Earth and take another body, so I better make sure that this is there and that's waiting for me and that's waiting for me. I mean, that's in the Tibetan teachings, is that you provide for your parents, what parents you're going to have, what country you're born in. So I think it's also true with friends like Sixon I had. I was more than a friend. So I think that you leave the avenues open for these things. You provide for them early in your lifetime. And then you would get into that lifetime, and because of whatever reason, the culture, your family, your ancestors, your karmas, you wouldn't take those. You'd turn away from those opportunities. You see how easy it is to do, that you wouldn't open up to those particular avenues, those nadis that you yourself had provided for with your own past good karmas. So that's why it's very important to keep consciousness foremost inside of yourself, and to crown yourself checker-wise with this ishtam that you're going to take everywhere with you. Surrender all to that ishtam, and let, like Sri Ramakrishna did, let Kali guide the whole thing. So in that way, you can love Kali as the ultimate, you see, but you don't want to get too close to the sun yet. It's the teaching, until you're able to bear that heat or look into that light. Enlightenment grows in the mind in stages. Sri Ram, whom we're studying these next month of Sundays, has often said to us, it grows in the mind in stages. So it's not just like lighting a match in a dark room, Sri Ramakrishna said, because that flash will only last for, that's called insight. You get insights when you concentrate, but that full maturation of realization comes in stages. And that's why we practice such practices as dissolution of the mind, and detaching from body and elements ahead of time, ripening our ego ahead of time. There's going to be an awful lot to manage at the time of death if you haven't prepared for that. Everything coming at you at once. And it's more towards the yogic law of living in the moment. You don't live in the present, you live in the eternal moment. The present is one of the phases of time, and people use the present to do this and that. nonsensical thing and waste time. But you live in the eternal moment. That's something that the yogis and yoginis, they know about that. We have about 10 minutes. Someone else has something to offer. I think Maggie is getting ready to say something. Am I right?
Namaste, Babaji. And Niranjan sends his regards as well. He is helping Yogin this morning. I been thinking a lot about, since our seminar on the fire of yoga and meditation upon fire in particular, it led me to think more on ether. And throughout meditation, I feel like I'm unable to fully grasp how to offer ether into that fire of yoga. And I was wondering if you can expand upon ether and its role in the kashas, and if you could provide some insight, that would be wonderful. Thank you.
It's funny that the most powerful of all the elements is the one that's sometimes eliminated from the list of elements. There are some list of elements in different countries that only have 4 elements, for instance. So what happened to ether? Because it's so subtle, because air is slightly comprehensible because you can feel the wind and you're breathing, and space really escapes the examination of the mind. But if it is trained to examine it as akashas or bardos, as we're talking in Tibetan Buddhism, or lokas, the kingdoms of heaven within, if those things are really taken up, then we find out how many-faceted and multivarious these akashas are, and that they would be one of the things that both help you develop an inner life by contemplating ether, and would also break down the barriers to thinking that there's only one ether, and that's physical. And that's a big stumbling block to people having a spiritual life nowadays. Is when you say they think they're the body, you might as well be saying they don't know that there's more than physical ether. That would be a way to go with that. It's much deeper than just focusing on the body and then making them feel guilty because they do that, or making them resentful because that's what they want, is just to be the body. So whatever the case may be, then you just say, well, beyond this physical ether, there are 4 other akashas we're taught in our tradition. So ether can fan out into another 5. So we have air, earth, fire, water, and ether is 5 panchakarna, 5-fold causes of things out here. And then those same 5 elements connect to the 5 senses, as we learn in yoga when we take up Yoga 101, which is, by the way, already beyond hatha. When you start thinking about connecting the 5 elements to the 5 senses, you're already beginning your journey in your inward journey into true yoga. But then you start meditating on earth and water and fire and air, and then you come to ether, the way Patanjali describes it, and it's not going to be so simple as just to say, oh, there's space with planets in it. That's mind-boggling enough for most people, and it can take astronomers and astrologists, even when they think about it, into more Maya. They can go deeper and deeper into just one aspect of the tattvas, the principles out here. And even geniuses get caught in that. well, I'm just going to look up in space now and see how light bends around a physical object, and they just don't know the origin of the whole shooting match up there until they find that akasha where their ancestors went, and they find that akasha where the gods exist, and they find that akasha where the rishis go, where the illumined souls go when they pass from the physical body. And then you're finding the kingdoms of heaven, and you're finding that space has much, much more to it than you had imagined when you were on the Burloka, physical loka. So it has to be understood first before it can be realized. You have to think it first before it is. It might as well not exist to people until they think about it. That's the beauty of opening up the mind. What to speak of to other religions or to deeper religion. Even right here amongst the five elements, you could open the mind to the subtler tattvas, the subtler elements of that appear here as the five elements in the gross form. So with ether, as I said, not mentioned in some of the sets of elements in other countries, also not mentioned much there in that burning pillar meditation I gave you. We were coming to the end of our time too when we were going into it. But you're up the centers of the central channel of the spine, the subtle spine, that is. You have the different elements there. You have the wind of earth, the wind of water, the wind of fire, the wind of air. What happened to the wind of ether? When you get there, it's just not mentioned. So that's how subtle space is, and why it makes up one of the five aspects of Maya: name, form, time, space, and this puzzling thing called causation or karma, causality, are the five things, the five main things in Maya. Everything else will be a permutation out of the combination of those five. So you can see how potentially puzzling space can be, and how alluring it can be, and how vast it is, and how we need to meditate on it, so that eventually we can reach that Mahakasha Sri Krishna talked about. When I reached the Mahakasha, that's beyond these four kashas I just mentioned, then I felt like a bird freed out of its cage, or like a fish just dumped out of a bowl that it lived in its whole life into a lake. He called that the Mahakasha, or the Chitakasha. So that's the space of consciousness, which is boundless. It means it doesn't have any boundaries, and it's infinite and eternal. And that's where you come up with those words to assign to something. And then you could say, well, that must be the nameless, formless Brahman that's beyond the other five akashas. And there will be no poisons there, or nothing to purify in that akasha, like there are at the other levels of akasha. There will be no desire to attach to the lower akashas when you see the inmost akasha, because the bird is just joyous flying into the sky. It's not thinking of attachment or detachment at that time. And you hear the scriptures talking about that a lot. It goes beyond these dualities of renunciation and non-renunciation, attachment and detachment. They try and explain it beyond even those dualities that are important to our spiritual practice, that allow us to understand such high principles as ether. So there's no air and there's no wind there, like there is in the ether of air, the wind of air at the I think it was at the throat chakra we were talking about at the time. By the time it gets to the third eye center, or and they're rendering the sixth center and our rendering the seventh, that is Kundalini as compared to this Buddhist type of meditation, then it's almost inconsequential at that point, because ether has, the mind has expanded so much that it's returned to that expansive and boundaryless level of consciousness that when it separated itself from and created an ego complex and wished to be separate from God, then it returns to that and gives up all those things that it used to project itself into a state of self, a separate I maker. It gave up the idea of turning itself into an I that's separate from the great I, what Vishishta calls the separate I maker, the ego. So it's very key and pivotal to understand ether and meditate on ether in all its facets, which is what the Father of Yoga wants you to do then. And this is when I said 49 days under the bo tree and 12 days and 12 nights in the wilderness and things like that. I'm not intending to say that they were sitting in the light all the time. Because Buddha met Mara at that time, which is the devil, the word for the devil, indicating all the devilish things in the mind, and had to gain victory over Mara in that meditation. So what are some other things that could happen in such a long meditation would be, I am the light of the worlds, is how Jesus put it when he came out of his time away from humanity and nature. I am the light of the world. So he had reached that Chitakasha, that Mahakasha, because he went there and he sat. And Muhammad did this too in the desert. Went there and sat for a long time and just put his concentration on the world and space. And then the next level of space that the world came out of, and the next level of space that the ancestors were in. That's how Lord Buddha detected the problem of attachment to the ancestor realm, which he called the Kala Chakra, the whole idea of rebirth in bondage got a facelift when 550 years before Jesus, because even India probably had lost the accent on that, generally speaking. So you wouldn't be able to, what I'm saying is you wouldn't be able to find out that you're bound into a cycle of rebirth until you studied the Pranakasha. And to study the Pranakasha, you would have had to sit for a long time and detach yourself from the bhutakasha, physical things, and then seen where the bhutakasha came from, the Pranakasha, and then where that came from and so forth. So this involutionary process that all of Indian philosophies from Samkhya all the way to Vedanta are so big on, including yoga and tantra and others, takes a long time to deprogram yourself from. Like I said, you wouldn't want to wait till death to come to see that this is all unreal and then be shocked all of a sudden when it was taken away from you. You'd want to know about this early on, Shankara style, like 8 years old, early on, and keep this wisdom with you in your divine memory. We looked at that chart, Vismriti, how one gets forgetfulness in that same seminar, and as opposed to Daivasmriti, keeping your divine memory. So you're going to have to teach your mind and your memory to focus on these teachings. That's part of that become a Jivanmukti path that we're talking about. That's how they do it. It's one of the greater, more important methods in which they do it and which they direct other people along, is meditating on these various tattvas. And we're running out of time here, but basically it's just very important that if the mind and senses are outward going all the time, as the Mundaka Upanishad says, is that you'll just come to take this as face value. You'll take all of this, objects, worlds, problems, sufferings, elements, senses, you'll come to take it all on face value as being real. That's what Vedanta attacks right at the beginning. Brahman is real, the world isn't. Brahman Satya, Jagat Mithya. So they're training you right away at the very beginning. If you've made the mistake already, then turn around and do that practice, which will detach you from all of these things and reorient yourself to the non-dual Brahman, which is the truth of life and existence. So may peace betide all, may wisdom dawn upon all. May all see the face of love and be fortified by the armor of wisdom. Om peace, peace, peace. May peace be unto us, may peace be unto all. Om Hari Om, Hari Om, Hari Om Tat Sat.